On a regular day, just like any other, Ryan Mitchell was walking through the busy downtown of New York City, his eyes fixed on his phone as he dealt with urgent work matters. Even amidst the noise of honking cars and the endless flow of hurried people, he managed to concentrate on the call with his assistant, discussing details of a new project his construction company was about to launch. For Ryan, work was everything. It was his identity, his refuge, and the way he justified the silence about his personal life. While he was talking, a soft sound interrupted him. "Hey, mister!" A small, sweet voice that barely made itself heard amidst the chaos. Ryan looked around, confused, until his eyes met a little girl with curly hair, shyly smiling. She was holding a slightly worn-out doll in her arms and had that curious, enchanting look of someone who still sees the world as a place full of mysteries and possibilities. For a moment, the sight of the girl made him lose his train of thought on the work call. "Mister, I know you," the little girl repeated, with an unexpected confidence for someone so small. "Your picture is in my daddy's wallet." Ryan knelt down to her level, intrigued, trying to understand how he could be in the wallet of someone he didn't know. He smiled to disguise his confusion and asked, "In your dad's wallet? And who is your dad, little one?" "My name is Clara," the girl responded proudly. "My dad is Mark." Ryan was surprised to hear that name. "Mark," he murmured, trying to recall a connection that would make sense. It had been years since he thought about his old friend, someone who had once been almost like a brother to him, but with whom he had lost contact long ago. What Clara said stirred something in him. Ryan wanted to ask more, but before he could continue the conversation, a car pulled up near the curb and a man hurried out. It was Mark, now a little older and with signs of fatigue on his face, but unmistakably the same friend from past times. Upon seeing Ryan, he hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how to react. Maybe it was surprise. Maybe it was a mix of old emotions he didn't know how to deal with. "Ryan," Mark finally said, with a nervous smile, "I didn't expect to see you here." The reunion was, at the very least, strange. There was a mix of nostalgia and discomfort in the air. Mark apologized for Clara approaching Ryan like that, but Ryan, still curious, reassured him and, smiling, said he would like to know more. Mark hesitated, looking at Clara and then at Ryan, as if carefully choosing his words. I think we should talk. Maybe grab a coffee and catch up. There's a lot from the past, and well, it would be good to talk." Clara smiled excitedly and held her dad's hand, as if trying to give a little push for that reunion. Ryan agreed, feeling there was something deeper behind that casual approach. Seeing Clara hugging Mark's leg and smiling at him, Ryan couldn't help but notice a certain familiarity in her eyes, an expression he couldn't quite identify, but that gave him a strange feeling of déjà vu. "All right, Ryan, call me later," said his assistant on the other line, noticing that his boss's attention was completely elsewhere. Ryan hung up the phone and put it in his pocket, with a nervous smile, trying to understand how a day that had started so normally was turning into something unexpected. Before they parted ways, Ryan insisted on setting up a meeting. "Let's grab a coffee and catch up. There's a place nearby that I always go to. How about tomorrow afternoon?" Mark seemed reluctant, but agreed, and as he put Clara in the car, he looked at Ryan once more. "It'll be good to talk. There are things you need to know, and I think it's about time." Ryan stood on the sidewalk for a while, watching the car drive away. His memories began to stir, bringing back recollections of times when he and Mark were inseparable. They had met in college, shared an apartment, confidences, and even the early steps in the business world. But something happened. A mix of pride or misunderstandings and lack of communication drove them apart. And since then, Ryan never really knew what happened to Mark. Until now. The next day, Ryan Mitchell found himself more anxious than he expected for the meeting with Mark. He had spent the morning dealing with meetings and negotiations, but at some point, he caught himself distracted, thinking about the curly-haired girl and what Mark had said. "There are things you need to know, and I think it's about time." That phrase echoed in his mind like a riddle that needed to be solved. He arrived at the coffee shop a little earlier than the agreed time and chose a table by the window. He liked to watch the street, as if he could find stories in the people who passed by. But that day his mind was focused on only one thing: what Mark had to tell him. He didn't know if it was curiosity, fear, or simply the desire to reconnect with an old friend, but something was pulling him towards that meeting. When Mark entered the coffee shop, Ryan noticed him immediately. He seemed tense, fiddling with his car keys, but he gave a cordial smile when he saw Ryan. The two greeted each other with a firm handshake and a hesitant hug, almost as if they were trying to gauge how much of their old camaraderie still existed. "You've changed a lot," Mark said, laughing as he settled into the chair. "But I couldn't forget your habit of always arriving early," Ryan smiled, trying to ease the tension. "Old habits die hard. But what about you? How have you been? I never thought I'd run into you like this after so long." Mark sighed and looked at the cup of coffee that the waiter had just placed on the table. "Well, life took me down different paths, you know. It hasn't been easy, but I'm getting by." He shrugged, as if trying to minimize the difficulties he had gone through, but Ryan could see the sincerity and pain between the lines. They began to talk about the past, about the old college days, reminiscing about funny stories and the early years of their careers. Mark shared how he had tried different jobs before settling as a rideshare driver, and how that change allowed him more time to take care of Clara. Gradually, the conversation deepened, moving away from the comfortable surface of memories and into more delicate territories. "Remember that time I disappeared about 7 years ago?" Mark asked, looking directly at Ryan. Ryan nodded, a bit confused. "Yeah, of course. You vanished without a trace. I tried to reach out a few times but never got a response." Mark took a deep breath and looked out the window, as if trying to find courage in the busy streets outside the cafe. "It was a tough time for me, Ryan. I had to step away because I was helping someone who needed me more." The silence that followed was broken by the clinking of a spoon against the cup. Ryan felt that he was about to hear something important, something he hadn't expected. "Who?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Laura," Mark answered, without hesitation. "Laura, your old girlfriend." For a moment, Ryan thought he had misheard. Laura. That name brought a wave of emotions and memories he thought he had buried forever. Laura was the love of his life, the woman he had envisioned a future with, but who drifted away due to his constant work trips and lack of time dedicated to their relationship. They hadn't exactly broken up. They just stopped talking, as if time and distance had put an end to their story. "What are you saying, Mark?" Ryan's voice came out stronger than he intended. "What do you have to do with Laura?" Mark took a long pause before responding, as if organizing the words inside himself. "After you and Laura drifted apart, she found herself in a complicated situation. She got pregnant, Ryan, and when she found out, she tried to reach you, but you were always traveling, focused on expanding your business, and then she decided to raise the child on her own." The shock ran through Ryan's body like an electric current. He felt his heart beat faster, as if trying to process what he had just heard. A daughter. Laura had a daughter. This doesn't make sense, Mark. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she try to talk to me? I never knew anything about this." "She tried," Mark insisted, his voice firm but understanding. "I was there when she tried to call, when she sent messages. But you were always busy, in another city, taking care of business. So she made the decision not to involve you. She was afraid it would complicate your life even more. And there were complications during the pregnancy, too. Laura needed support, and that's when I stepped in." Ryan felt the weight of Mark's words like punches. It was as if a hidden truth, which had always been there, was finally coming to light. "So, Clara is—" Mark nodded slowly, confirming what Ryan could barely articulate. "Yes, Clara is your daughter, Ryan." Ryan's world seemed to collapse at that moment. All the certainties he had, the control he always kept over his life, dissolved with the revelation that he had a 7-year-old daughter he never knew existed. And all of this had been kept from him, shielded under layers of pride, fear, and perhaps good intentions that had spiraled out of control. He looked at Mark, trying to understand, trying to find a reason not to feel angry, not to drown in guilt and sadness. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Ryan managed to ask, his voice now hoarse and almost inaudible. 7 years, Mark. 7 years I lost everything. The first steps, the first words. I missed all of that. Because I promised Laura I wouldn't tell, Mark replied, his voice choked. She was afraid. Ryan. Afraid of complicating your life. Afraid of how you'd react. Afraid of complicating Clara's life. She just wanted to protect her daughter. And you. Ryan was silent. Mark's words echoed like a final verdict. He wanted to scream, to blame someone. But the truth was that none of it would change what had happened. He had missed precious years by not being present, and he didn't know how to make up for that lost time. But one thing was certain, he needed to meet his daughter. After the meeting at the coffee shop, Ryan returned home with a whirlwind of thoughts. He had always been a practical man, someone who found quick solutions to any problem in business. But that revelation left him completely disoriented. As he drove through the bustling streets of New York, it was as if the noise around him had disappeared, leaving only the echo of Mark's words. Clara was his daughter, a daughter he had never met, who had grown up without his presence. Guilt and sadness mingled, forming a knot in his chest that seemed impossible to untangle. When he got to his apartment, Ryan dropped his keys and phone on the table and sat on the couch, staring out at the city through the window. He knew he couldn't just ignore what he had discovered. He needed to understand more. He needed to know why Laura made that decision. And most importantly, he wanted to meet Clara. The thought that she had spent all those years not knowing who he was tormented him. He remembered the little girl's shy smile and how she seemed curious and comfortable talking to him, not knowing she was standing in front of her own father. The idea that he was a stranger to her was painful. The next day, Ryan couldn't focus on work. He cancelled appointments, postponed meetings, and finally decided to do what he probably should have done a long time ago: find Laura. The uncertainty of how she would react made him nervous, but he knew he needed to talk to her and get answers. He called Mark and asked for Laura's address, and after a brief hesitation, Mark agreed. "She's living in a quiet neighborhood, away from downtown," he explained. "Just, please, Ryan, be gentle. She's been through a lot." As he drove to the neighborhood Mark had mentioned, Ryan tried to imagine what the meeting would be like. He hadn't seen her in years, and the memories he had were of a time when everything was simpler, when they were in love and believed they could overcome any obstacle together. But life had shown just how fragile those dreams could be. Now that he was going to see her again, not as the boyfriend she once knew, but as a man who needed to understand why he had been kept out of his own daughter's life. The neighborhood where Laura lived was simple and welcoming, with small houses and tree-lined streets. As he parked the car in front of the indicated house, Ryan felt a nervousness wash over him, as if he were about to enter unfamiliar territory. He took a deep breath and walked to the door, ringing the bell with a hesitation he rarely showed in any situation. Laura opened the door and, for a moment, stood still. Her eyes widened, and it was impossible to hide the shock she felt, seeing Ryan standing there. It felt like an eternity as they looked at each other, trying to absorb what it meant. She had aged a bit, but there was still something familiar in the way she kept her hair tied up and in the gentle manner of her movements. "Ryan," her voice was low, almost a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you, Laura," he replied, trying to control his own anxiety. "I met Mark, and he told me about Clara." Ryan's words seemed to hang in the air, and Laura leaned against the door, as if trying to brace herself for what was coming. There was a mix of surprise and apprehension in her eyes, and for a moment she considered closing the door, avoiding the confrontation. But she knew it wouldn't help. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Ryan entered the house and was greeted by a cozy, simple environment. There were photos of Clara scattered around the living room, pictures of her at birthday parties, playing in the park, holding the doll he had seen the previous day. Ryan couldn't help but smile when he saw those images, trying to associate each one with the daughter he didn't know. trying to imagine what she was like in the moments he had never been there for. But soon his smile faded, and he turned to Laura, feeling the urgent need to understand why he was never included in that life. "Why, Laura?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but unable to hide the pain. "Why didn't you ever tell me I had a daughter?" Laura sighed, closing her eyes for a moment as if trying to find the right words. "It was a hard decision, Ryan, and it wasn't because I wanted to keep you away. It was because I thought it was best for everyone. When I found out I was pregnant, you were at a critical point in your career, always traveling, always busy. I tried to reach out a few times, but it seemed like it was never the right time. You think that justifies it? You think I wouldn't have dropped everything to be there for you, for our daughter?" He realized that his voice had come out harsher than he intended. "You made that decision alone, and now I don't know what to do with it." "I know it seems unfair," Laura said, her voice heavy with emotion, "but there was more to it than that. During the pregnancy, there were complications. The doctor said there was a chance Clara could be born with health problems, and I was scared. I was afraid, Ryan, afraid of how you'd handle it, afraid of burdening you when I knew you were so focused on building your career. So I decided it was better to face it on my own." Ryan felt the ground give way beneath his feet. He wanted to scream. He wanted to find a way to blame someone for missing all those years, but he knew Laura also carried the weight of that choice. "And what happened? Is she okay?" "Yes," Laura replied quickly, easing Ryan's anxiety. "There were scares at the beginning, but she's a healthy child, strong and full of life." A smile formed on her face as she talked about Clara, and Ryan could see the love she had for her daughter. "But I never planned to hide this from you forever. I was trying to protect everyone." Ryan closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to absorb everything he was hearing. There were so many conflicting emotions inside him: anger, sadness, relief, hope. He knew he couldn't turn back time, couldn't get those lost years back. But he could decide what to do from this point on. "I want to meet her, Laura," he said, his voice low but firm. "I know I haven't been there. I know you made that decision because you thought it was best. But now that I know, I want to be part of her life. I want to be her dad." Laura looked at Ryan, assessing his words, and saw the sincerity in his face. She knew that this moment was inevitable and perhaps even necessary. "All right," she said finally, after a long silence. "But we need to do this slowly. Clara doesn't know who you are yet, and I want her to understand that this is a good thing, something that can bring her happiness." Ryan nodded, feeling that this was the first step of a long journey. He didn't know how it would be to build a relationship with Clara, didn't know how she would react to finding out she had a dad she didn't know, but he was willing to try, willing to fight for this chance to be part of her life, and maybe also to rebuild ties with Laura somehow. In the days following his conversation with Laura, Ryan lived in a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The idea of meeting Clara, of looking at her and seeing a part of himself reflected, filled his heart with a hope he hadn't felt in a long time. Yet, along with that hope, there was also fear. What if Clara didn't accept him? What if she found it strange or uncomfortable? He didn't want to force anything, but he also knew he couldn't give up on this opportunity. Laura suggested that the first meeting between Ryan and Clara be casual and low pressure, so the girl could gradually get used to him. They decided he would join them for a weekend outing to the park, where Clara often played with other children. It would be a chance for Ryan to observe her, get to know her a bit more, and perhaps find a way to approach her without seeming like a stranger. When Saturday finally arrived, Ryan felt his heart race as he entered the park. He couldn't remember the last time he felt so nervous. There was something ironic about it. He, a man who ran one of the largest construction firms in the country, who was used to handling multi-million-dollar negotiations and complex decisions, was standing there, hesitant and unsure, about to meet a 7-year-old girl who would change his life forever. He spotted Laura first, sitting on a bench under the shade of a tree, with a serene smile on her face. She waved at him, and Ryan felt a bit of relief seeing that, at least, Laura appeared calmer than he was. Next to her, Clara was kneeling on the grass, absorbed in an imaginary game with her doll. Her golden curls bounced gently as she played, and Ryan couldn't help but notice how happy and carefree she looked, completely unaware of the emotional storm he was experiencing. "Hi," Ryan said, approaching Laura and casting a nervous glance at Clara. She looks like she's having fun. She loves this park," Laura replied, smiling. "She always says it feels like a magical world here." Ryan chuckled, though he felt his nerves intensifying. "I guess kids have that gift, turning any place into something magical." Laura nodded, watching Clara with an affectionate gaze. "Are you ready to meet her, Ryan?" He took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I think I am," Laura called Clara, who looked up and ran over to them with a smile, still clutching her doll. "Mom, who's this?" she asked, with the natural curiosity that only children have. "Clara, this is Ryan. He's a friend of mine," Laura said, carefully choosing her words. "He really wanted to meet you. Remember, I told you there would be a surprise today?" Clara looked at Ryan, a mix of curiosity and shyness in her eyes. "Hi, Ryan," she said, giving a timid smile, before turning her attention back to her doll. "Do you want to play with us?" Ryan felt a lump in his throat at the simple yet meaningful invitation. "Sure," he replied, kneeling down beside her on the grass. "What are you playing?" "We're playing family," Clara explained, her voice animated. "This is the mommy doll, and this is the baby. They're having a picnic." The way she spoke with such enthusiasm warmed Ryan's heart, and he found himself smiling back. "A picnic sounds like a great idea. Can I help with anything?" Clara looked at him for a moment, considering his offer, and then nodded. "You can be the daddy doll," she said, handing him a doll that was lying on the grass. "He was late for the picnic, but it's okay." Ryan almost laughed, surprised by the coincidence. It was as if Clara was giving him a role he desperately wanted to take on in real life. He accepted the doll and placed it next to the others, feeling a surge of emotion at how significant that moment was. They spent the next few minutes playing, and Ryan was surprised to see how quickly Clara felt comfortable around him, as if he was already part of that little world she had created. While they played, Ryan and Laura exchanged glances now and then. There was a silent understanding between them, a recognition that this was just the beginning, but a beginning that already meant a lot. Ryan was grateful Laura had allowed him to be a part of this, and he knew it was an important step in building a bond with Clara. After a while, Laura suggested they go get some ice cream, and Clara immediately got excited about the idea. "Are you coming with us, Ryan?" she asked, looking at him with those bright, eager eyes. "Of course I am," he replied, his heart warming. "I'd love to." As they walked to the ice cream stand, Ryan found himself thinking about how this simple, everyday moment felt so special. Clara held Laura's hand with a confidence only a daughter can have, and for a brief instant, Ryan felt a pang of envy. He wanted to be there for her in such a natural way, wanted Clara to look at him with the same trust, but he knew it would take time. For now, he was just happy to be by their side. They sat on a nearby bench and started savoring their ice creams. Clara was animated, talking about her games and the stories she and her mom made up at home. Ryan listened attentively, every word from her sounding like a new and precious discovery. He found himself laughing at the little pranks Clara shared, and the girl seemed pleased to have a new audience for her stories. "Do you like strawberry ice cream, Ryan?" Clara suddenly asked, as she licked her cone. "Because I think it's the best flavor in the world." "I do," he said, smiling. "But I think I like it even more now after hearing you say that." Clara giggled, and Ryan realized that her laughter was a sound he wanted to hear more often. It was as if each laugh she gave erased a bit of the weight he carried, like a promise that maybe things could work out, that he could be a part of her life without causing disruption or pain. When they were getting ready to leave, Clara looked at Ryan and, with the simplicity only children have, asked, "You'll come again, right? Because I like you." Ryan felt his heart almost stop at that. He looked at Laura, who smiled and nodded encouragingly. "I will, Clara," he said, his voice firm and sincere. "If you'd like, I can come more often." Clara beamed, satisfied. and went back to holding Laura's hand as they walked to the car. Ryan watched the two of them, feeling a joy he didn't know was possible. For the first time in a long time, he felt like his life was expanding in a way that business and work had never managed to. He was building something real, something that couldn't be measured in contracts or numbers. As he watched Clara climb into the car and wave goodbye, Ryan realized that a new journey was beginning. It wouldn't be easy, he knew that, but he was willing to face any challenge to be a part of Clara's life, and somehow he felt that Laura was also part of this new path. Maybe, just maybe, this encounter was a chance to heal old wounds, to find something he didn't even know he had been looking for. The meetings between Ryan and Clara became more frequent over the following weeks. Sometimes Laura would join them, but other times she preferred to let them spend time alone, giving Ryan the chance to strengthen his bond with his daughter. Ryan always felt nervous before seeing her, but more and more he realized that Clara was a lively, curious and light-hearted girl. She surprised him with unexpected questions and spontaneous comments that showed the sincerity and simplicity of children. He felt lucky to have the chance to get to know her, and each moment together was a new discovery. One afternoon, after a trip to the zoo, Clara suggested they go to a nearby park to fly a kite. "Do you know how to fly a kite, Ryan?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Of course I do," he replied, laughing, "but I think you'll have to teach me again. It's been a while since I've done it." Clara giggled and, grabbing his hand, pulled him towards the park. They spent the afternoon running around, flying the kite and laughing as they tried to keep it in the air. Ryan couldn't remember the last time he felt so carefree, so disconnected from the constant worries that accompanied him. He realized that, little by little, Clara was breaking down the walls he had built around himself. The corporate world, the meetings and contracts all seemed distant and irrelevant when he was with her. While Clara played, Ryan took the opportunity to talk more with Laura. They were rediscovering a kind of friendship they thought had been lost. There was an unexpected comfort in being together, but also a subtle tension, a remnant of the love that had never completely faded. The moments they shared with Clara felt like a blend of the present and a past that still connected them. However, they knew they needed to address the unresolved issues to truly move forward. After one of these outings, Ryan decided it was time for a more serious conversation. He invited Laura to dinner without Clara so they could talk openly. Laura hesitated before accepting, but in the end she agreed, realizing that the moment was necessary for both of them. The restaurant was cozy and quiet, with only a few tables and soft lighting that created an intimate atmosphere. When Laura arrived, Ryan noticed she was more nervous than usual, and he wondered if she felt the same mix of hope and apprehension that he did. They ordered their meals and for a few minutes exchanged only small talk, stuck in a casual conversation that couldn't hide the tension in the air. "Laura," Ryan began after a long silence, "I want to thank you for everything you've done. I know it can't have been easy letting me into Clara's life after all this time, and I'm really grateful for that." Laura sighed, twirling her wine glass. "I knew this moment would come. And to be honest, Ryan, I'm also happy that you're part of her life. Clara deserves to know her dad. But I need to understand a few things," he continued, his voice more serious. "I've been trying to be patient, and I think we've made good progress. But I still don't completely understand why you decided I shouldn't know about Clara. I know you explained, but it feels like there's more." Laura was silent for a moment, then looked directly at him. "You want to know if I regret it, don't you? If I would have done things differently?" Ryan nodded slowly, not breaking eye contact. "Yes, I need to know if you still think hiding this was the right decision." She hesitated, as if carefully choosing her words. "I won't lie, Ryan. For years I questioned whether I did the right thing, but at the time I could only think about what was safest for Clara. You were at a crucial point in your career, and I was afraid that, that an unexpected pregnancy would turn your life upside down, pull you away from what you wanted to achieve. And I didn't want to be the reason for that. But you do realize that I had the right to know," said Ryan, his voice firm but not aggressive. "You took away my chance to choose. I can never get those years back, Laura, and that hurts." "I know," she replied, with a weary sigh. "And maybe I underestimated how much it would affect you. I was so afraid of making the wrong choice that I ended up making a decision that should never have been mine alone." Ryan looked at her, trying to understand the complexity of the emotions that passed through her eyes. He didn't want to turn the conversation into a confrontation, but he needed her to understand how much this had affected him. "I'm not trying to blame you," he said softly. "I just want us to move forward without more secrets, without more things left unsaid." Laura nodded, and for the first time that evening, she seemed to lower her defenses. "I understand, Ryan. And I think Clara feels it too. She knows you want to be present, that you're really trying. She talks about you with so much enthusiasm after your outings that it makes me happy and, at the same time, a little scared. Because I know that if something goes wrong, it'll hurt even more." "I'm not going anywhere," Ryan said, with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I know I need to earn my place in her life, and that takes time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Laura observed him, and a small smile appeared on her lips. "Clara is lucky to have you as her dad, even if it took a little while for you two to find each other." Ryan felt a wave of relief. It was as if, for the first time, they were truly understanding each other, accepting the mistakes and circumstances that had brought them to this point. There was a silent acknowledgement that the past couldn't be changed, but the future was still open, and that was a promise he was willing to keep, not just for Clara but also for Laura. "There's something else," Laura said suddenly. "Something I've always wanted to tell you, but never had the courage to." She took a deep breath and looked directly into Ryan's eyes. "I never stopped caring about you, Ryan, even after everything, even after making decisions that drove us apart. I just wanted you to know that." Ryan was speechless for a moment. He had spent so much time trying to keep his composure, trying to figure out how to move forward, that he didn't expect to hear that. "I never forgot you either," he finally replied. "And maybe I still need to understand what that means for me, but knowing you feel the same, it changes everything." Laura looked away for a moment, as if struggling with her own emotions. "I don't know where this will lead, Ryan, but I think we need to be honest with each other for Clara's sake, and maybe, who knows, for our own too." Ryan nodded, feeling like this was the first time in years that they were truly opening their hearts to one another. He knew there was still much to resolve, that things wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt there was a real chance to start over, and that was all he needed to keep fighting. The following months were marked by a new routine in Ryan's life. He learned to balance his time, juggling the constant demands of his construction company with the precious moments he now shared with Clara. Work was no longer his sole priority. He found renewed joy in small things, like picking Clara up from school, helping her with homework, or just listening to her talk about the imaginative adventures she invented for her toys. He realized, day by day, how much she brightened his life, filling spaces he hadn't even known were empty. But it wasn't just his relationship with Clara that was changing. Spending more time with Laura brought out feelings that Ryan had tried to bury for years. There was something familiar and comforting about the way they were rebuilding their friendship, but also a subtle tension, a remnant of the love that had never completely faded. The moments they shared with Clara felt like a blend of the present and a past that still connected them. However, they knew they would have to address the unresolved issues to truly move forward. One day, Clara was particularly excited. She had a performance at school and insisted that both Ryan and Laura attend. "It's our Christmas show," she said, with the enthusiasm typical of a child about to show off something important. "I'm going to be one of the stars that helps guide Santa." For Ryan, it was the first time he would attend something like this, and he felt a genuine nervousness. It was strange to think that such a simple event could mean so much. But he knew Clara was expecting him, and he wanted to be there, sitting in the audience, cheering her on. When he and Laura met at the school, Ryan realized that this moment felt like more than just a children's performance. It was a symbol of everything he had achieved over the past few months, and also of everything he still needed to build. The performance was adorable. Clara took the stage, dressed in a golden star costume, and smiled when she saw her parents sitting together in the audience. She waved discreetly, and Ryan felt a surge of pride and emotion. When the show ended, they met in the hallway, and Clara ran into Ryan's arms, beaming. Did you see, Daddy? I was a real star." It was the first time Clara called him Daddy in public, and Ryan could barely hold back his tears. He hugged her tightly, feeling that, in that moment, everything had been worth it. "You were the most beautiful star of all," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Laura, watching the scene, felt a mix of joy and nostalgia. She knew how much that simple gesture meant to Ryan and to Clara. She saw how Ryan's eyes sparkled, and for the first time in a long while, she realized he was genuinely happy. She also understood that, despite all the fear and uncertainty that had led her to keep Clara from him, Ryan had proven himself to be a loving, dedicated father who would do anything to make up for lost time. After the show, they decided to celebrate with a simple dinner at a neighborhood pizzeria, a place Clara loved. Sitting at the table, laughing and chatting, Ryan felt part of a family for the first time in years. He watched Clara interact with Laura, noticing how the two shared a special connection, and felt grateful to be able to share in that bond. It was during dinner that Clara, in her typical spontaneity, asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "Daddy, why don't you and Mommy live together?" The silence that followed was palpable. Laura and Ryan exchanged glances, trying to find an answer that was simple enough for Clara, but also respected the complexity of the situation. "Well, sweetie," Laura began, trying to keep her tone light, "sometimes people need time to figure things out, but that doesn't mean we aren't together in a special way." Clara seemed to ponder this for a moment before shrugging and turning her attention back to the pizza. For her, the answer was sufficient, but for Ryan and Laura, the question lingered as a reminder of something they still needed to face. When they were leaving the pizzeria, Clara, already sleepy, dozed off in the car, and Ryan offered to drive them home. Upon arriving, Laura decided it was time to have a more definitive conversation, and she invited Ryan inside. "I think it's time we resolved a few things," she said, as she tucked Clara into bed. They sat in the living room, in the quiet of the night. Laura looked nervous but also determined. "Clara is right, Ryan," she began. "We've been living in this bubble of happiness for a while, but we need to decide what it all means for us." Ryan nodded, feeling the weight of the conversation. "I know, Laura, and I've thought about it a lot. I want to be part of Clara's life, and I want that to be as natural and stable as possible. But I also want to know what this means for us. Because, to be honest, I still care about you, and sometimes I feel like there's still something between us." Laura closed her eyes for a moment, trying to control her emotions. "I feel it too," she admitted. "But I'm scared, Ryan. Scared that we might repeat the same mistakes, that if we try again and fail, it'll hurt Clara even more." "I understand the fear," he said gently. "But I also know that if we don't try, we'll never know what could have been. And maybe, just maybe, this time we can make it work, because now we have something we didn't have before, Clara. And she's shown us that it's worth fighting for." There was a long silence, and then Laura smiled, a smile that was both sad and hopeful. "I'd like to try, Ryan, but we need to take it slow, without pressure. Clara needs stability, and we need time to understand how we can work together." Ryan nodded, feeling a wave of relief. "That's all I want, Laura. A chance to make it work. I can't promise it'll be perfect, but I can promise I'll try every day." In that moment, sitting together on the couch, there was a quiet reconciliation. It wouldn't solve all their problems at once, and they knew there were still challenges ahead. But there was a new hope, a new promise that this time they could build something solid. Months later, on a sunny afternoon, Clara was celebrating her 8th birthday. Ryan and Laura had planned a small party at the park where she loved to play, and all her school friends were there. Clara ran around, showing off her presents and playing with her friends, while Ryan and Laura watched from a distance, side by side. They were together, not just as parents, but as two people who had decided to give love and family a second chance. When Clara ran over to them, breathless and happy, she grabbed their hands to bring them closer. "Now that I have both Mommy and Daddy together, everything is more fun," she said, with a simplicity that made Ryan and Laura laugh. Ryan picked her up and spun her around, making her giggle. "And it's going to be like this for a long time, my little star," he said, looking at Laura and realizing that he had finally found something more valuable than any success he had ever achieved in business: a family. And that was a promise he was determined to keep. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing to our channel and supporting us through the thanks button. See you next time.